Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the alien ship and watched his home world burn. Earth looked like a small blue ball covered in orange flames. Each flash of light meant millions of people were dying down there. His hands shook as he watched the attack continue. The weapons that were destroying his planet were the same ones he had helped the aliens build. 3 years ago, Jake had been the best military leader humanity had. He led the Earth Defense Force against the alien invaders, called the Caltharians. These reptile-like creatures had come from deep space with ships bigger than cities and weapons that could crack planets in half. For 2 years, Jake had fought them and won many battles. He was a hero to everyone on Earth. But then the Caltharians did something unexpected. Instead of fighting harder, they sent a message to Jake personally. They wanted to talk. They said they had an offer that would change everything. Jake was curious, so he agreed to meet with them in secret. The meeting took place on a small moon between Earth and Mars. Jake came alone in a small ship as they had asked. The Caltharian leader was a tall creature with green scales and yellow eyes. His name was Admiral Vexhai, and he spoke perfect English, which surprised Jake. The alien told Jake things about the universe that no human knew. He showed him star maps of a galaxy filled with thousands of different species. He explained how humans were seen by the rest of the galaxy as a dangerous virus that needed to be stopped before they spread too far. Other species had watched humans fight wars for centuries, and they were afraid. Admiral Vexhai made Jake an offer. If Jake helped the Caltharians defeat Earth quickly, then Jake would be allowed to live. More than that, he would be given a place in their empire. He would have access to technology that was thousands of years ahead of human science. He could live for hundreds of years and travel to worlds that humans could never reach on their own. Jake asked what would happen to the rest of humanity. The alien was honest. Most humans would die. Some would be kept alive as workers on distant planets. But the human race as a free species would end. The Caltharians called it the cleansing, and they said it was necessary for the good of the galaxy. Jake had 2 weeks to decide. He went back to Earth and tried to continue fighting, but everything looked different now. He saw how humans treated each other during the war. He saw the fear and anger and violence that the aliens talked about. He began to think that maybe the Caltharians were right. Maybe humans were too dangerous to be allowed to spread across the stars. The decision was the hardest thing Jake had ever done. He thought about his wife who had died in the first alien attack. He thought about his friends who were fighting and dying every day. But he also thought about living forever and seeing wonders beyond imagination. In the end, his fear of death won over his love for his species. Jake sent the Caltharians everything they needed. He gave them the codes for Earth's orbital defense platforms. He told them where the secret military bases were hidden. He explained how human ships and weapons worked. He even told them the best times to attack when Earth's defenses would be weakest. The attack began 3 days later. Jake watched from the Caltharian command ship as Earth's defenses fell one by one. The orbital platforms that had protected his home for years were destroyed in minutes. Cities that had stood for thousands of years were turned to glass by alien weapons. Billions of people died in the first hour. Jake told himself he was saving the universe from human violence. He said he was preventing bigger wars that would kill even more people. But as he watched Earth burn, he started to feel sick. These were his people dying down there. His neighbors and friends and family members. Children who had never hurt anyone were being killed because of what he had done. Admiral Vexhai came to stand beside Jake as they watched the planet burn. Jake expected the alien to thank him or congratulate him on a job well done. Instead, the Admiral looked at Jake with something that looked like disgust. The alien spoke in a voice full of hate. He told Jake that his usefulness was over. Did Jake really think the Caltharians would let even one human live among them permanently? Jake was an abomination. He was a creature that had betrayed his own species. If he would turn against his own people, then how could the Caltharians ever trust him? Jake felt his blood turn cold as alien guards moved to surround him. He had been so sure that his value would protect him. He had given them everything they wanted. He had helped them win the war. But now he realized his mistake. The Caltharians did not just hate human civilization. They hated all humans, including him. The guards grabbed Jake's arms and started to drag him away. He looked back at Earth one last time. The blue world that had given birth to his species was now a burning rock floating in space. He had killed his own people for the promise of eternal life, and now he was going to die anyway. As they pulled him toward the prison cells, Jake realized the truth. He had not escaped humanity's wrath by betraying them. He had simply delayed it. Now he would face justice not from his own kind, but from the aliens who despised him. He had traded the love of his people for the hatred of his enemies. It was not a good trade. The stolen Caltharian data that Jake carried contained information that could change the war. Inside the files were the exact locations of 3 major alien weapon factories. The data showed production schedules, security details, and even the best times to attack when the factories would be most vulnerable. This intelligence could save millions of human lives, but getting it to the Resistance meant revealing himself to people who wanted him dead. Colonel Sam Patterson commanded the largest human resistance cell operating in the outer systems. His base was hidden inside the abandoned mines of New Colorado, a planet that had been strip-mined for rare metals before the war started. The Resistance had turned the old tunnels into a fortress, where over 2,000 human fighters and refugees lived and planned their attacks against the Caltharians. Patterson was a career military man who had been off-world when Earth was destroyed. He had lost his wife and 2 children in the attack and blamed himself for not being there to protect them. When he learned that Jake Morrison had been the one who gave the aliens the information they needed to break Earth's defenses, Patterson swore he would kill the traitor with his own hands if he ever found him. The colonel's intelligence officer was Dr. Emma Walsh, a former university professor who had become an expert at breaking alien codes and analyzing their communications. Emma was the one who first detected the encrypted messages that Jake was sending from his hiding places. The messages contained pieces of the stolen Caltharian data, along with offers to provide everything in exchange for safe passage to Resistance territory. Emma brought the intercepted messages to Colonel Patterson during a command meeting that included Major Alex Rodriguez and Captain Danny Brooks. The room fell silent as Emma explained what the data contained. The information about the weapon factories was exactly what they needed to strike a real blow against the aliens, but accepting help from humanity's greatest traitor felt wrong to everyone in the room. Major Rodriguez was the first to speak against accepting Jake's offer. His entire family had died on Earth, and he blamed Jake personally for their deaths. Rodriguez argued that working with the traitor would be like betraying every human who had died in the invasion. The Resistance was supposed to represent the best of humanity, not make deals with its worst. Captain Brooks agreed with Rodriguez. He pointed out that Jake had already betrayed his own people once. How could they trust him not to do it again? For all they knew, this was a Caltharian trap designed to reveal the location of the Resistance base. Jake could be working for the aliens even now. But Dr. Emma Walsh saw things differently. She had studied the data carefully and was convinced it was real. The technical details matched everything they knew about Caltharian technology. The intelligence was too good and too specific to be fake. She argued that they could not let pride and anger prevent them from striking a blow that could save countless human lives. The debate went on for hours. Some of the Resistance fighters wanted to capture Jake and execute him publicly to show that traitors would face justice. Others believed that revenge was less important than winning the war. Emma kept pointing out that the weapon factories were producing the guns that were killing humans every day. If they could destroy those factories, they could save more lives than Jake had cost. While the Resistance argued about what to do, Jake remained hidden in the asteroid belt between New Colorado and the nearest Caltharian patrol route. He survived by raiding supply convoys and stealing what he needed from abandoned ships. Every day he intercepted Resistance communications and learned about failed operations that his intelligence could have prevented. Jake listened to reports about human colonies being wiped out and rescue missions that had failed because the Resistance did not know where the aliens would be. Each death report felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. He had caused the destruction of Earth, and now his refusal to share what he knew was causing more deaths every day. The situation became desperate when the agricultural world of Haven's Rest came under siege. The planet was home to 50,000 human colonists who had been farming there for over a century. The Caltharians surrounded the planet with their fleet and demanded that the colonists surrender. When the humans refused, the aliens began bombing the farms and cities. General Kethamor, the Caltharian military leader, made a broadcast that was heard throughout human space. He announced that the siege of Haven's Rest was not about conquest. It was about drawing out the traitor Jake Morrison. If the humans turned over Jake, the colonists would be allowed to live. If not, the entire population would be executed as an example to other human settlements. Jake watched the broadcast from his hiding place and felt sick. The aliens were not just hunting him anymore. They were using him as a weapon against his own people. Every day he remained free, more humans would suffer. The Caltharians had turned his survival into a curse that followed other humans wherever they went. Colonel Patterson faced an impossible decision. The Resistance could try to break the siege of Haven's Rest, but they would need weeks to get their ships into position. By then, everyone on the planet would be dead. The only way to save the colonists quickly was to give the aliens what they wanted. Dr. Emma Walsh made one final argument to the colonel. She pointed out that Jake's data could help them destroy the weapon factories, even if they gave him to the Caltharians. But the timing would have to be perfect. They would need to launch their attack while the aliens were distracted by Jake's capture. Patterson realized that accepting Jake's help meant watching him suffer for their benefit. The aliens would torture Jake for information and probably broadcast his pain to demoralize other humans. The Resistance would have to use Jake's sacrifice as cover for their attack. It was a terrible choice, but it might be the only way to strike back effectively. As the colonel prepared to make his decision, Jake sent one final message to the Resistance. He offered to surrender himself to General Kethamor in exchange for the safety of Haven's Rest, but he asked for one promise in return. When he was in alien custody, the Resistance had to promise to use his capture as a distraction and attack the weapon factories with everything they had. Colonel Patterson stared at the message for a long time before making the call that would haunt him forever. Jake's escape pod spun through empty space toward the edge of known space. The small ship's emergency beacon sent out signals hoping someone would answer. Behind him, the Caltharian fleet was probably looking for him already. He had stolen their prisoner transport ship during a transfer between prison facilities. It was not a smart plan, but it was the only chance he had. Inside the stolen ship, Jake found something valuable. The Caltharians had left data files about their military operations on the computer. Jake copied everything he could find before the security systems locked him out. The information included fleet positions, supply routes, and weapon factory locations. It was the kind of intelligence that could help the human resistance if any resistance still existed. Jake's destination was Kepler Station, a trading post in the Outer Rim where criminals and smugglers did business. It was the kind of place where people did not ask questions if you had money to pay them. Jake hoped he could hide there long enough to figure out what to do next. The station was a huge metal structure built inside a hollowed-out asteroid. Ships of many different species docked at its ports. Jake was relieved to see that some of the ships looked human. That meant at least some of his people had survived the destruction of Earth. As Jake's pod approached the station, he detected something that made his heart sink. Caltharian patrol ships were sweeping through the system. They were checking every ship and scanning every signal. They were looking for him, and they were getting close. The station's docking controller was a human woman, named Lisa Chen. Her voice came through the radio with a thick accent that Jake recognized as coming from the Mars colonies. She guided his pod to a small docking bay and told him to stay inside until she could come talk to him. Lisa arrived at his pod 20 minutes later with 2 armed guards. She was a short woman with gray hair and suspicious eyes. When Jake told her his real name, her face changed from cautious to angry. She had heard of him. Everyone in the remaining human settlements had heard of Jake Morrison the traitor. Lisa agreed to let Jake stay on the station, but only because she needed information about Caltharian movements. She told him that human refugees had been arriving at stations like hers for months. Most had horrible stories about their families and friends being killed in the attacks. Many of the refugees wanted to kill Jake themselves when they learned who he was. Jake learned that small groups of human fighters were still operating throughout the galaxy. They called themselves the Resistance. and they were led by people like Captain Ryan Torres and Lieutenant Amy Parker. These freedom fighters attacked Caltharian supply convoys and rescued human prisoners when they could. But they also hunted down human collaborators and traitors. Jake would be shot on sight if any resistance fighters found him. Lisa explained that the situation was getting worse every day. The Caltharians were not just satisfied with destroying Earth. They were hunting down every human settlement they could find. Colonies that had existed for decades were being wiped out. Refugee ships were being attacked as they tried to flee to safety. Jake realized that his survival was making things worse for other humans. Every day he stayed alive, he drew Caltharian attention to places where humans were hiding. The aliens were using massive resources to hunt for him specifically. Ships that could have been attacking human settlements were instead searching for one man. On the second day at Kepler Station, the Caltharian patrols got closer. Their ships began scanning the station directly. Lisa came to Jake's hiding place with bad news. The aliens were demanding that the station turn over any human fugitives. If the station refused, they would destroy it and everyone on it. Jake looked out through a small window at the docking bays. He could see human families with children waiting for transport to safer systems. These people had already lost everything when Earth was destroyed. Now they might die because Jake was hiding on their station. Lisa told Jake he had maybe 6 hours before the Caltharians decided to attack the station. That was assuming none of the other humans on the station decided to turn Jake in for the reward money. The aliens were offering enough credits to buy a small planet for anyone who gave them Jake Morrison. Jake thought about surrendering himself to save the station. But then he remembered the data files he had stolen from the Caltharian ship. The information about their weapon factories and supply routes could help the human resistance fight back. If he died now, that intelligence would die with him. As Jake tried to decide what to do, he intercepted radio messages from human resistance cells. He learned about failed attacks and rescue missions that had gone wrong. People were dying because they did not have good information about Caltharian defenses. The data Jake carried could save lives, but only if he could find a way to get it to the right people. The irony was terrible. Jake had betrayed humanity to save his own life. Now the only way to help his people was to risk that same life again. But this time the stakes were different. This time he was not choosing between his life and his people's freedom. He was choosing between his death and their survival. Jake made his decision as the Caltharian ships moved closer to the station. He would not surrender, and he would not stay hidden. He would find a way to contact the human resistance and give them the intelligence they needed, even if it meant certain death for him. The hunt was just beginning, but Jake was no longer running just to save himself. Now he was running to save what was left of humanity. It was a strange feeling for someone who had once helped destroy his own species. Colonel Patterson sent his reply to Jake after 3 hours of painful deliberation. The resistance would accept Jake's offer. They would take his intelligence data and use his surrender as cover for a coordinated attack on the 3 Caltharian weapon factories. In return, Jake would give himself up to General Kethmore to save the people of Haven's Rest. Dr. Emma Walsh was the first person to understand what they were really agreeing to do. Jake was not just offering to die for the resistance. He was offering to be tortured for information while they prepared their attack. The aliens would try to break him and force him to reveal resistance locations and plans. Jake would have to endure whatever they did to him without giving away secrets that could get more humans killed. The intelligence data that Jake provided was even better than Emma had hoped. The files contained detailed blueprints of the weapon, factories, guard rotations, supply schedules, and even the personal habits of the alien commanders who ran each facility. Jake had also included tactical plans for how to attack each factory with the maximum chance of success. Captain Danny Brooks led the team that would attack the factory on Kepler 7. Major Alex Rodriguez would take his fighters to hit the facility on Titan Prime. Colonel Patterson would personally lead the assault on the main production center at Vega Station. If all 3 attacks succeeded, the Caltharian war machine would be seriously damaged. But first they had to watch Jake Morrison surrender himself to their enemies. The handover took place in orbit around Haven's Rest, with ships from both sides present as witnesses. Jake came alone in a small shuttle with his hands already bound as a sign of good faith. The aliens were represented by General Kethmore himself aboard his flagship. Jake's surrender was broadcast across the galaxy on all frequencies. Humans hiding in refugee camps and resistance bases watched as the man who had betrayed their species knelt before the alien general. Some cheered to see their enemy finally captured. Others felt sick watching any human beg for mercy from the creatures who had destroyed Earth. General Kethmore smiled as Jake was brought before him on the bridge of the Caltharian ship. The alien general had been looking forward to this moment for months. He told Jake that his capture would not be quick or merciful. The aliens planned to spend weeks breaking him down piece by piece until he revealed every secret about human resistance operations. Jake met the alien's gaze without flinching. He told General Kethmore that he did not expect mercy and did not want redemption. He knew that nothing could make up for what he had done to Earth, but maybe his death could prevent other humans from suffering the same fate. The general laughed at Jake's words. He explained that Jake's sacrifice would not redeem him in the eyes of any human. Jake would die as he had lived, as a traitor who had sold out his own species. But before he died, he would tell the Caltharians everything they wanted to know about human resistance operations. The torture began immediately and was broadcast to human settlements as psychological warfare. General Kethmore wanted every human to see what happened to those who opposed the Caltharian Empire. He also wanted to break the spirit of the resistance by showing them the suffering of even their enemies. Jake endured 3 days of agony without revealing any useful information. The aliens used devices that could cause incredible pain without permanent damage, keeping their prisoner conscious and aware throughout the ordeal. Every scream and cry of pain was transmitted across the galaxy for humans to hear. In resistance bases throughout human space, fighters wept as they listened to Jake's torture. These were people who had sworn to kill the traitor on sight, but hearing him suffer for their benefit made them feel sick with guilt. Jake Morrison had destroyed their world, but he was dying to give them a chance to fight back. On the 4th day of Jake's captivity, the Resistance launched their coordinated attack. Captain Brooks hit the Kepler-7 factory exactly as Jake's intelligence had predicted. The facility's defenses were down for maintenance, and Brooks' fighters destroyed the entire complex in less than an hour. Major Rodriguez found similar success at Titan Prime. The alien guards were caught completely off guard by the precision of the human attack. Rodriguez's team not only destroyed the weapon factory, but also rescued over 300 human prisoners who had been forced to work in the facility. Colonel Patterson led the most dangerous mission against the main production center at Vega Station. The facility was heavily defended, but Jake's intelligence included details about a weak point in the station's shields. Patterson's fighters exploited that weakness and penetrated deep into the station before the aliens could respond. Effectively, all 3 attacks succeeded beyond the Resistance's wildest hopes. The weapon factories that had been producing the guns used to kill humans were now smoking ruins. The Caltharian war machine had suffered its first major setback since the invasion began. Human resistance cells throughout the galaxy celebrated their first real victory, but the celebration was tempered by the knowledge of what it had cost. Jake Morrison continued to suffer in alien custody even after the attacks were complete. General Kethmore had discovered that keeping the traitor alive was more useful than killing him quickly. Jake's continued torture served as a constant reminder to humans that even their victories came at a terrible price. The Resistance faced a new moral dilemma. They had used Jake's sacrifice to achieve their greatest victory. But now Jake was suffering endlessly for their benefit. Some fighters argued that they should try to rescue him. Others believed that Jake deserved whatever happened to him. The debate tore at the heart of what the Resistance stood for. Dr. Emma Walsh pointed out the cruel irony of their situation. Jake Morrison had betrayed humanity to save his own life. Now he was being tortured endlessly because his death had become more valuable to humans than his freedom. His survival had become both a symbol of human defiance and a reminder of human guilt. Colonel Patterson realized that Jake's sacrifice had changed the nature of their war. They were no longer fighting just for survival or revenge. They were fighting to justify the price that had been paid for their chance to fight back. Every human who died in future battles would be measured against the sacrifice Jake had made. The war continued, but everything was different now. The Resistance had proven they could hurt their enemies, but only by accepting help from their greatest traitor. They had achieved victory, but only by watching their enemies suffer for their benefit. It was a win that felt like a loss and a success that tasted like failure. The destruction of the 3 Caltharian weapon factories marked the beginning of a new phase in the war. Human resistance cells that had been barely surviving suddenly found themselves with hope and momentum. The aliens' grip on conquered human territories began to weaken as their supply lines were disrupted and their military production crippled. But Jake Morrison's torture continued for weeks after the successful attacks. General Kethmore had realized that the traitor was more valuable, alive than dead. Every day that Jake remained in alien hands was a reminder to humans that their victories came at a terrible cost. The general broadcast Jake's suffering throughout human space as a form of psychological warfare. Colonel Patterson found himself leading rescue missions not out of forgiveness for Jake, but because the man's continued suffering had become a symbol that the Resistance could not ignore. Human fighters who had once sworn to kill Jake now risked their lives trying to save him. His torture had become a rallying cry that united the Resistance in unexpected ways. The rescue attempts failed repeatedly as the Caltharians moved Jake between different prison facilities. Each failure cost human lives and resources that the Resistance could barely afford to lose. But Patterson knew they had to keep trying. Jake's intelligence had given them their greatest victory, and his continued sacrifice was inspiring humans throughout the galaxy to fight back. Dr. Emma Walsh analyzed the intelligence that Jake had provided and discovered that it contained even more valuable information than they had first realized. Hidden in the technical data were clues about other Caltharian operations and weaknesses. Jake had given them a roadmap for winning the war, but only if they could decode all the information he had risked everything to steal. The breakthrough came when Captain Danny Brooks captured a Caltharian communications officer during a raid on a supply convoy. Under interrogation, the alien revealed the location where Jake was being held. The facility was a maximum security prison on the planet Zarian Prime, deep in Caltharian territory. It would be the most dangerous rescue mission the Resistance had ever attempted. Colonel Patterson assembled a strike force of the best fighters from all the Resistance cells. Major Alex Rodriguez volunteered to lead the assault team, even though he had once wanted to kill Jake himself. Captain Amy Parker brought her squadron of the fastest ships to provide cover for the escape. It would take everything they had learned about fighting the aliens to have any chance of success. The rescue mission succeeded, but at a terrible cost. Half of the human fighters died breaking into the prison facility. Captain Parker was killed providing cover for the escape ships. Major Rodriguez was captured during the retreat and presumably tortured for information about Resistance operations. They saved Jake Morrison but lost some of their best people doing it. Jake was barely alive when they pulled him from his cell. Months of torture had left him broken in body and spirit. He could barely speak and did not seem to recognize his rescuers at first. Dr. Walsh had to work for days just to stabilize his condition enough for him to survive the journey back to Resistance territory. When Jake finally recovered enough to understand where he was, he asked why they had saved him. Colonel Patterson explained that Jake's sacrifice had become a symbol of human defiance. His willingness to suffer for the Resistance had inspired fighters throughout the galaxy. They could not leave him in alien hands because his rescue was as important as his intelligence had been. Jake looked around at the Resistance base that had been built in the ruins of an old mining facility. Children who had been born after Earth's destruction played in the corridors. These were humans who had never seen their homeworld, but who carried its memory like a sacred flame. They were the future of humanity, and they existed because of victories that Jake's intelligence had made possible. But Jake could not escape the weight of what he had done. Every human life that had been saved because of his intelligence was measured against the billions who had died because of his betrayal. Every victory achieved with his help was shadowed by the memory of Earth burning in space. He had become humanity's greatest traitor, and its most reluctant savior at the same time. Admiral Amy Parker had been promoted to lead the human liberation fleet after the original Captain Parker died in Jake's rescue. She commanded a force of captured alien ships and human vessels that struck at Caltharian targets throughout the galaxy. The fleet existed because of the intelligence Jake had provided, but Amy could never forget the price that had been paid for that information. Jake found himself in a position he had never expected to occupy. The Resistance needed his knowledge of Caltharian technology and tactics, but they could never fully trust him. He had betrayed his own species once, and some people believed he might do it again. He was valuable but dangerous, necessary but despised. The war continued, with humans winning more battles than they lost for the first time since the invasion began. Refugee ships that had once fled in terror now traveled under the protection of human warships. Colonies that had been abandoned were being reclaimed and rebuilt. Hope was returning to a species that had almost given up. But Jake Morrison remained haunted by the choices he had made. He sat on the bridge of the captured Caltharian dreadnought that now served as the Resistance flagship and watched human ships escort convoys of refugees to safety. These people lived because of intelligence he had provided, but they lived in a universe where their homeworld was gone forever. Admiral Parker asked Jake if his betrayal had been worth it in the end. Jake watched a formation of human fighters practice maneuvers that would help them survive future battles. These pilots were using tactics developed from Caltharian data that Jake had stolen. They were alive because of his sacrifice, but they were fighters because of his betrayal. Jake told the Admiral to ask him again when the war was over, but he suspected the answer would always be no. Nothing could justify what he had done to Earth. No victory could bring back the billions who had died because of his choice. No sacrifice could balance the scales of his betrayal. He had escaped humanity's wrath by betraying his own species, only to discover that survival itself was his punishment. Every day he remained alive was another day to remember what he had cost his people. Every victory achieved with his help was a reminder that he was both savior and destroyer. Jake Morrison had learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the greatest curse is getting exactly what you thought you wanted. He had wanted to survive at any cost, and he had gotten his wish. But the cost of that survival was something he would carry until the last star burned out in the cold depths of space.